It was just a simple family portrait until historians discovered the secret of one of the children. Dr. Rebecca Turner opened Archive Box 247B at the Massachusetts Historical Society on a cold January morning in 2024. The box contained photographic materials from the Whitman family estate, recently donated following the death of the last surviving descendant. Her assignment was straightforward: catalog, authenticate, and assess the historical value of approximately 60 photographs spanning 1870 to 1920. The collection appeared unremarkable at first. Standard cabinet cards showed stern Victorian faces, grandparents, wedding couples, individual portraits of children in Sunday clothes. Each photograph followed the conventions of its era: formal poses, dark backgrounds, subjects positioned to minimize movement during long exposures. Then Rebecca encountered item 17. The photograph measured 8 by 10 inches, mounted on heavy cardboard backing, typical of professional studio work. On the reverse side, written in faded ink, Whitman family, October 14, 1893, Salem, Massachusetts. Hastings Photography Studio, Essex Street. The image showed 5 subjects arranged in a formal parlor setting. A man and woman, both appearing to be in their mid-30s, occupied chairs positioned slightly apart. The woman sat on the left, the man on the right. Between them stood 2 boys, the taller approximately 10 years old, the shorter perhaps 8. Both wore dark suits with white-collared shirts. Their expressions were blank, their eyes fixed forward with unusual intensity. In the woman's lap sat a girl of approximately 6 years. She wore a white dress with elaborate lace detailing at the collar and cuffs. Her hands were folded across her abdomen. Her hair had been carefully arranged with a white ribbon. Her eyes were closed. Rebecca's initial assumption was that the child had fallen asleep during the sitting. Young children frequently dozed during the lengthy exposure times required by 1890s camera technology. However, certain details contradicted this interpretation. The mother's hands were positioned with deliberate precision around the child's torso and beneath her arms, not the casual hold of a parent with a sleeping child, but the careful placement of someone ensuring a body remained upright and stable. Rebecca examined the photograph under magnification. The child's skin had an unusual pallor, even accounting for the limitations of 19th century photographic chemistry. This was a post-mortem photograph. Rebecca set the photograph aside and opened her laptop. Before drawing conclusions, she needed to verify what she was seeing against established historical documentation of post-mortem photography practices in 1890s New England. Post-mortem photography had been common in America from approximately 1840 through 1910. The practice emerged alongside the daguerreotype process and grew as photography became more accessible and affordable. For many working-class and middle-class families, a post-mortem photograph was often the only image they would ever have of a deceased loved one, particularly children who died before their families could afford a formal portrait sitting. Rebecca accessed the digital archives of the Thanatos Archive, a research database documenting American death customs and material culture. She cross-referenced photographic techniques, regional practices, and specific indicators that distinguished post-mortem images from photographs of living subjects. The evidence aligned with her initial assessment. Several key factors identified the Whitman photograph as post-mortem work. First, the child's positioning. The mother's hands served a structural purpose, supporting the body in an upright seated position. This was standard practice. Photographers and families often posed deceased children as if sleeping or resting peacefully, believing this presentation was less disturbing than showing the body lying flat. Second, the timing notation on the back of the photograph. October 14, 1893 was almost certainly the date of the photography session, not the death itself. Families typically waited 1 to 3 days after death to arrange a post-mortem photograph, allowing time to notify the photographer, prepare the body, and dress the deceased in appropriate clothing. Third, the white dress. While white was sometimes used for living children's formal portraits, it was the standard color for post-mortem photography of young girls in the 1890s. White symbolized innocence, purity, and the Victorian belief that dead children became angels. Rebecca returned to the physical photograph, examining it through a jeweler's loupe at 10 times magnification. She could now see additional details invisible to the naked eye. Under magnification, the photograph revealed specific technical characteristics consistent with post-mortem photography of the period. Rebecca documented each detail systematically, photographing the image with her high-resolution digital camera and making notes in her conservation log. The child's face showed no motion blur whatsoever, unusual even for a sleeping child, who would typically shift slightly during the 30 to 60-second exposure time required by cameras in 1893. The complete absence of any blur suggested absolute stillness achievable only by a deceased subject. The eyes were closed, but the eyelids had a flattened appearance. Rebecca knew from her research that Victorian mortuary practice sometimes involved placing cotton or small coins on the eyelids of corpses to keep them closed. The slight depression visible in the photograph indicated this technique had been used. Most tellingly, the child's hands showed a specific positioning. They were folded across the abdomen with fingers interlaced, a pose that required deliberate arrangement. A sleeping child's hands would typically fall naturally to the sides or rest loosely in the lap. This formal arrangement was characteristic of mortuary preparation. Rebecca examined the studio notation again. Hastings Photography Studio had operated on Essex Street in Salem from 1889 to 1902. She cross-referenced the name against local business directories and found that Thomas Hastings had advertised memorial portraiture as one of his specialties, a common euphemism for post-mortem photography. She needed more context. Who were the Whitmans? What had caused this child's death? And why had this photograph survived for 131 years, preserved carefully enough to end up in a historical society's collection? Rebecca returned to the archive box and began searching for additional materials that might provide answers. Beneath layers of tissue paper, she found a leather-bound book, approximately 5 by 7 inches, with a brass clasp. The cover was embossed with faded gold lettering, Family Record. She opened it carefully. The pages were brittle but intact. Inside was a genealogical record maintained in careful handwriting, documenting births, marriages, and deaths in the Whitman family from 1875 through 1918. She turned to the entries from 1893. The genealogical record was organized chronologically, with each entry dated and written in the same careful script. Rebecca recognized the handwriting style as typical of educated women in the late 19th century. Formal, precise, with elaborate capitals and consistent spacing. She located the year 1893 and found the entry she was looking for. October 11th, 1893. Our beloved daughter, Anna Louise Whitman, departed this life at age 6 years and 4 months. Cause, diphtheria. She passed peacefully at home in the presence of her mother, father, and brothers Thomas and William. Dr. Horace Fletcher attending. Burial, October 13th. Harmony Grove Cemetery, Salem. May the Lord grant her eternal rest. 3 days between death and burial was standard for the period. The photograph had been taken on October 14th, 1 day after the burial. This detail surprised Rebecca. Most post-mortem photographs were taken before burial, while the body was still at home. Photographing the family after the burial suggested a different purpose, not memorializing the deceased child's physical appearance, but documenting the family's grief and creating a record of them all together, united in mourning. Rebecca continued reading the family record. The next entry was dated November 1893. This month has been the darkest of our lives. Anna's absence is felt in every corner of our home. Thomas, age 10, has become withdrawn and speaks little. William, age 8, wakes crying in the night, calling for his sister. My husband Robert works long hours at the mill and returns home exhausted, unable to speak of his sorrow. I find myself standing in Anna's room, holding her dresses, unable to accept that she will never wear them again. The entries continued through the winter of 1893-1894, documenting the family's struggle with grief. The mother, Rebecca, checked the front of the book for the name. Margaret Whitman wrote about the difficulty of maintaining household routines, the silence at the dinner table where Anna had sat, the painful experience of seeing other children Anna's age playing in the street. Then, in March 1894, Margaret wrote something that caught Rebecca's attention. Today, I took out the photograph Mr. Hastings made of our family. I had not been able to look at it since it was delivered in November. Rebecca needed to understand more about Thomas Hastings and his photography practice. Post-mortem photography had been a legitimate and respected service in the Victorian era, but individual photographers approached it differently. Some specialized in it, advertising memorial portraiture prominently. Others accepted such commissions reluctantly, viewing them as unpleasant but necessary work. She contacted the Salem Historical Society, and requested access to any surviving business records from Hastings' photography studio. Within 2 days, she received a response. The society held 3 ledger books covering 1889 to 1902, donated in 1965 by Hastings' granddaughter. Rebecca made the trip to Salem on a gray Wednesday afternoon. The Historical Society occupied a federal-style brick building near the waterfront, its archive room lined with climate-controlled cabinets and long research tables. An archivist brought out the ledger books, large cloth-bound volumes with marbled end papers. She opened the 1893 ledger and turned to October. Each entry listed the client's name, the date of the session, the type of photography commissioned, the number of prints ordered, and the amount paid. Hastings had maintained meticulous records. October 14, 1893. Whitman, Robert, family memorial portrait. 5 subjects, 2 8x10 prints, 4 cabinet cards. Total, $12 paid in full. $12 was a significant sum in 1893, roughly equivalent to $300 in modern currency. The Whitmans had not been wealthy, based on other evidence in their family records, but they had spent a substantial portion of their income on this photograph. Rebecca continued examining the ledger. Hastings had photographed approximately 6 to 8 memorial portraits per year between 1889 and 1902. Not a major part of his business, but steady work. His entries were professional and respectful, never using casual language or showing discomfort with the subject matter. At the back of the 1893 ledger, Rebecca found something unexpected, a separate section titled Personal Notes and Observations. Here, Hastings had recorded brief comments about particularly memorable sessions or technical challenges. Under October 14th, he had written, "The Whitman sitting. The mother could barely hold herself together. The father spoke not one word. The boys stood like statues. I have photographed many grieving families, but rarely have I seen such profound sorrow." To fully understand the context of Anna Whitman's death and her family's response, Rebecca researched diphtheria's impact on American families in the 1890s. The disease had been one of the leading causes of childhood death in the late 19th century, particularly affecting children between the ages of 2 and 10. Diphtheria was a bacterial infection that attacked the throat and airways, forming a thick gray membrane that could suffocate victims. It spread rapidly through communities, often striking multiple children in the same family. Mortality rates ranged from 30 to 50% before the development of antitoxin treatments in the mid-1890s. Rebecca accessed medical records from Salem's Public Health Department, archived at the Massachusetts State Library. In October 1893, Salem had experienced a significant diphtheria outbreak. Between September and December, 43 cases were reported in the city, with 18 deaths, all but 3 of them children under age 12. The public health reports described the outbreak's progression through working-class neighborhoods near the textile mills. The Whitman family's address, which Rebecca found in the 1893 city directory, was located in one of the affected areas. Contemporary medical literature revealed the traumatic nature of diphtheria death. Children often suffered for 5 to 7 days, struggling to breathe as the membrane thickened in their throats. Families watched helplessly as their children suffocated slowly. Doctors could do little beyond attempting to remove the membrane mechanically, a painful and usually unsuccessful procedure. This context made the post-mortem photograph more understandable. After witnessing their daughter's agonizing death, Robert and Margaret Whitman had wanted to remember her at peace, free from suffering. The photograph showed Anna as they wished to remember her, clean, dressed beautifully, her face calm and unmarked by the disease that had killed her. Rebecca returned to Margaret Whitman's diary entries from October 1893, reading them now with fuller understanding of what the family had endured. October 8th. Anna can barely swallow. Doctor, Fletcher says the membrane is thick. He tried to remove some of it, but she screamed terribly. I cannot bear to see her suffer so. Margaret Whitman's family record book contained not only her own entries, but also, beginning in 1900, occasional entries written by her sons as they grew older. Rebecca found these later additions while examining the full contents of the record book. In 1903, Thomas Whitman, then 20 years old, had written a retrospective entry about his sister's death and its impact on the family. I am 20 now, and 10 years have passed since Anna died. I can still remember everything about that October. I remember the sound of her coughing, the way Mother cried when the doctor said there was nothing more he could do. the smell of carbolic acid they used to disinfect the house after she died. I remember standing in Mr. Hastings's photography studio 3 days after the funeral, wearing my Sunday suit, trying not to look at Anna sitting in Mother's lap. I knew she was dead, but she looked almost alive, just sleeping. That photograph hangs in our parlor now. Sometimes I catch Mother looking at it, touching the frame, whispering to Anna as if she can hear. William Whitman, the younger brother, had added his own entry in 1905. I was 8 when Anna died. For years afterward, I could not look at the photograph without feeling sick. It seemed wrong to me that we had dressed her up and posed her like a doll, pretending she was just asleep. But now I am 20, and I understand better what Mother and Father needed. They had no other photographs of Anna. This was their only way to keep her image with them. When I look at it now, I see my little sister as she was, quiet, gentle, always wearing white dresses with ribbons in her hair. The photograph preserved her exactly as we remember her. These entries revealed the complex emotions surrounding post-mortem photography. For the parents, the photograph had been essential, a tangible connection to their lost child. For the surviving children, it had been disturbing, even traumatic. Yet with time, even the brothers came to appreciate its value as the only visual record of their sister's existence. Rebecca noted that this tension was common in Victorian families. Post-mortem photography served the emotional needs of parents, but often troubled surviving siblings who had to witness the staging of death. Rebecca spent the next several weeks researching how the Whitman photograph had survived from 1893 to 2024. She traced the family's history through census records, city directories, and genealogical databases. Robert Whitman, the father, had worked as a supervisor at the Naumkeag Steam Cotton Company mill until his death in 1911. Margaret had outlived him by 23 years, dying in 1934 at age 76. According to her obituary in the Salem Evening News, she had remained in the family home on Bridge Street until her final illness. Thomas Whitman had married in 1908 and moved to Boston, where he worked as a clerk for an insurance company. William had remained in Salem, taking over his father's position at the mill and eventually becoming a plant manager. He had married in 1910 and had 3 children. The photograph had remained with William's branch of the family. When he died in 1947, his eldest daughter, Ruth, inherited the family home and all its contents, including the photograph and Margaret's family record book. Ruth had preserved these items carefully, apparently understanding their historical significance. In a letter Rebecca found among the archived materials, Ruth had written to her own daughter in 1982, "The photograph of your great-grandmother Margaret holding little Anna is one of our most precious family heirlooms. I know it seems strange to modern eyes. Why would anyone photograph a dead child? But you must understand that in 1893, most families had no photographs at all. When a child died, there was no image to remember them by, no face to recall as the years passed. This photograph was my grandmother's most treasured possession. She looked at it every day of her life after Anna died. When she became elderly and her memory began to fail, she could no longer remember many things, but she never forgot Anna's face, because she had this photograph to look at." Ruth had died in 1995. Her daughter had kept the photograph and family records until her own death in 2023, at which point the entire collection had been donated to the Massachusetts Historical Society. 131 years after it was taken, the photograph of Anna Whitman and her grieving family had found a permanent home. Rebecca began preparing her formal assessment report for the Massachusetts Historical Society, analyzing the Whitman photograph's historical and cultural significance. Post-mortem photography had largely disappeared from American culture by 1920, making surviving examples like this one valuable primary sources for understanding 19th century attitudes toward death, mourning, and memory. The Victorian era had been characterized by elaborate mourning customs. Death was not hidden away in hospitals and funeral homes as it would be in the 20th century. It occurred at home, with family members present. Bodies were prepared by family members, laid out in the parlor for viewing, and mourned with rituals that lasted months or even years. Post-mortem photography was one element of this broader mourning culture. The photographs served multiple purposes. They provided a visual record for family members who could not attend the funeral. They created a permanent memorial when no previous photographs existed, and they offered consolation to grieving parents by showing their children at peace. The Whitman photograph was particularly significant because it documented not just the deceased child, but the entire family's grief. The composition of the image, mother holding the dead child, father sitting apart in isolated sorrow, brothers standing rigidly with traumatized expressions, captured the devastating impact of childhood death on 19th century families. Rebecca noted in her report, "This image serves as a historical document of the diphtheria epidemic that swept through Salem in 1893, the limited medical interventions available at the time, and the emotional toll of childhood mortality on working-class families." The accompanying family record book provides rare first-person documentation of grief, mourning practices, and the long-term psychological impact on surviving family members. She recommended that the photograph be included in the Society's permanent exhibition on 19th century New England family life, with interpretive materials explaining post-mortem photography practices and their cultural context. The Society's curator agreed. The photograph would be displayed with appropriate sensitivity, acknowledging both its historical importance and the genuine human tragedy it represented. 6 months after discovering the Whitman photograph, Rebecca stood in the Massachusetts Historical Society's newly opened exhibition, Faces of the Past, Photography and Memory in 19th Century New England. The Whitman family portrait occupied a central position, mounted in a climate-controlled case with accompanying text panels explaining post-mortem photography practices. The exhibition designers had handled the image respectfully, providing context without sensationalizing. The text panel read, "Post-mortem photography was a common practice in Victorian America, particularly for families who had lost children. Between 1840 and 1910, these photographs served as treasured mementos for grieving parents who often had no other images of their deceased children." This 1893 portrait shows the Whitman family of Salem, Massachusetts, one day after burying their 6-year-old daughter Anna, who died of diphtheria during a citywide epidemic. The photograph, commissioned from a local studio, was kept by the family for over a century and represents both a private moment of grief and a broader historical reality. Childhood mortality was common, and families developed cultural practices to cope with devastating loss. Visitors moved slowly past the exhibit, many stopping to read the full story. Rebecca watched their reactions. Initial surprise at learning the child was deceased, followed by visible emotion as they read Margaret Whitman's diary entries, displayed in transcription beside the photograph. An elderly woman stood before the image for several minutes, then turned to her companion. "My great-grandmother had a photograph like this," she said quietly. "A baby who died in 1887. I always wondered why they would photograph a dead child. Now I understand. It was the only way to keep that child's memory alive." This, Rebecca realized, was the value of preserving and interpreting historical photographs like the Whitman portrait. They allowed contemporary viewers to understand past experiences that seemed foreign or unsettling, to recognize the universal human need to remember loved ones, and to appreciate how different eras developed different cultural practices to address the same fundamental aspects of human existence: love, loss, grief, and memory. The photograph of Anna Whitman, her small body held carefully by her mother, her face peaceful in death, her family's grief visible in every detail of the composition, had transcended its original purpose. It had become a historical document, an educational resource, and a reminder that behind every old photograph was a real family who loved, suffered, and found ways to preserve what mattered most to them. Anna Louise Whitman had died at age 6 in October 1893. But 131 years later, her image remained, allowing her to be remembered not just by her descendants, but by anyone who took the time to look at her face and understand the story it told.